They say graduation is a mother's proudest moment, the reward after years of sacrifice, carpool lanes, midnight projects, and school lunch arguments. But no one prepares you for the moment your child turns and uses that stage to humiliate you in front of hundreds. The auditorium smelled like plastic chairs and freshly printed programs, and I remember holding my phone up with both hands, trying to focus through the blur of tears. I didn't understand yet. The moment was supposed to be simple. He walks, they call his name, he takes his diploma, I cheer quietly from my corner seat in row D. I wasn't expecting a speech, and I definitely wasn't expecting that speech. "And to my mom," he said into the mic, his voice a little too loud, a little too rehearsed. "Thanks for showing me what not to do with your life." There was laughter, real laughter, a few claps, some even whistled. I felt my spine snap straight, like someone had dumped a glass of cold water down my back. I didn't clap. I didn't move. I just stared at the stage where my son, my only child, was grinning, like he'd just won something. I remember the woman next to me leaned in, not with comfort, but with curiosity. "Was that you?" she whispered. I nodded. Barely. And then I looked down at my lap where my hands had been clenching my purse so tightly the strap had left a red mark across my fingers. I didn't cry. Not yet. I couldn't. Because even in that moment, something else was rising up through the hurt. Not confusion, not sadness, but an old kind of fire. The kind I hadn't felt in years. The kind I thought had been buried with the dreams I shelved to raise him. I raised that boy alone, paid for every meal, every field trip, every pair of sneakers he outgrew too fast. I sat through every science fair, every dentist appointment, every night he refused to do homework until I bribed him with stories or snacks or promises I barely had the energy to keep. And somehow, all that love, all that sacrifice, had boiled down to a punchline, a public insult, a joke. But if he wanted the world to judge me, then maybe it was time they saw the full story, not the edited version he told on stage. Because I wasn't just a mother. I wasn't just some woman in the audience who got in the way of his spotlight. I was the reason he made it to that stage at all. And if he thought calling me stupid would dim my light, he had no idea what kind of fire he just lit. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And I had a story of my own to tell. The moment we got back to the car, he was all smiles, tossing his cap in the back seat like it was just any other Tuesday, not the day he'd chosen to humiliate the only person who had ever stood by him. "Did you hear them laugh?" he said, buckling his seatbelt with a smirk. I killed it. I stared at the steering wheel for a full 5 seconds before starting the engine. My hands were steady. My voice was calm. But something inside me was snapping apart. Slowly, cleanly, like a frozen branch under pressure. "You think that was funny?" I asked, my eyes still locked on the road. He shrugged. "It's a joke, Mom. Don't be so sensitive." Sensitive. That word always seemed to get thrown at women who were finally done swallowing things they never should have had to. I bit the inside of my cheek and drove in silence. I dropped him off at the house, a house I paid for, a house he never once offered to help maintain. And as he slammed the door and walked inside like he owned the place, I just sat there for a moment longer, breathing, feeling, deciding. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman sitting behind that steering wheel wasn't the same one who used to beg her manager for time off to attend parent-teacher conferences. She wasn't the one who skipped meals to afford cleats for soccer or hid final notices so he wouldn't feel guilty. That woman had died a quiet death somewhere between his 17th tantrum and the second time he forgot my birthday. The woman who remained? She'd built something, quietly, steadily, while he slept in, while he scrolled past job listings, while he posted memes mocking people who worked hard. I had been building an empire, one contract at a time, one client at a time, one sleepless night at a time. And now, it was time to stop hiding it. For years I'd downplayed my work, let him believe I was some outdated relic who didn't get it because I thought that's what moms were supposed to do. Take a back seat so their children could drive. But he wasn't driving. He was coasting. on fumes I'd provided, and it was time I took the wheel back. That night, I didn't cook dinner. I didn't fold his laundry. I didn't ask him how his night out with his friends had gone. I sat in my office, pulled up the dashboard of my consulting agency, and looked at the quarter's numbers. Record-breaking, 6 figures in 3 months. I forwarded the documents to my attorney. Time to separate assets. Time to draw the line. Time to stop treating my son like a helpless child when he had no problem standing on a stage and treating me like a national joke. He wanted independence. He was going to get it. Cold, complete, and final. He wanted the world to judge me, then let them. But they'd be judging a woman who rebuilt her life from ashes, who carried someone else's future on her back while building her own in secret. The days of silence were over, and my next move would echo louder than any speech he ever gave. The next morning, I made coffee like usual, but this time, I didn't pour him a cup. I set one mug on the counter, for me, and sat down at the table with my laptop open, reviewing a proposal that could double our Q3 revenue. He stumbled in late, hair a mess, phone in hand, and mumbled, "We out of milk?" I didn't answer, just kept typing. He opened the fridge, slammed it shut, sighed dramatically like the world owed him something better than silence. "So you're mad?" he asked, leaning on the island like he was the one owed an apology. I closed my laptop slowly, looked up, and said, "No, I'm awake." He laughed, confused. "Okay, Buddha, whatever that means." Then he wandered off. But I wasn't waiting anymore. That afternoon, I called the accountant. The car, my name. The house, my name. The utilities, the credit lines, even the streaming services, mine. I asked him how cleanly we could split assets if the dependent in question wasn't a spouse but an adult child. He said, "You'd be surprised how often I get this question." I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. By that Friday, I had the legal documents drafted. I also emailed the realtor. Not to sell, to downsize. I didn't need a 4-bedroom house anymore. I didn't need a kitchen for holiday dinners that never came, or a guest room that only ever held silence. I needed a space for me. Peaceful, light-filled, close to the city. That night, he came home late again, reeking of cheap beer and bad decisions. "Yo," he called from the hallway. "Rent's due tomorrow. Can you transfer me some for utilities?" I didn't move from the couch. "You'll need to start covering those on your own. My support ends next month." He blinked, confused. "Wait, what?" "You wanted independence," I said. "Here it is." His voice rose. "Are you serious? Just like that?" I nodded. "Just like that." He stormed off, muttering insults, the same ones he thought were jokes in front of his friends. But this time, they didn't land. This time, I wasn't listening through the ears of a mother hoping for kindness. I was listening like a woman who finally understood her value, and he didn't get to define it anymore. I started packing on Sunday, room by room. Anything I wanted, I boxed. Anything I bought, I claimed. He hovered awkwardly. "You're moving?" "Yes," I said plainly. "To where?" "A place of my own. This is your place?" "No," I said, zipping a suitcase. "This was your place for far too long." I saw panic flicker behind his eyes. Not grief, not guilt, just fear. Fear that the band card might stop working, that the ride he never respected might finally end. I didn't soothe it. I let it settle. Because maybe that fear would teach him what entitlement never could. And maybe, just maybe, he'd learn to stand, not just on his own 2 feet, but with a spine he had to build himself. I wasn't going to watch anymore. I wasn't going to explain. My silence would be the lesson, and his consequences, his alone to carry. I moved out on a Wednesday morning while he was still asleep, which felt poetic in its own way. I had already packed everything I needed the night before: my laptops, my books, my certificates, the worn little box of photos he never looked at but I kept anyway. The movers came early, efficient, quiet, just like how I used to be. I left the house key on the kitchen counter with a note: "Electricity bill transfers to your name this Friday. The rest is already gone." I didn't need to leave a forwarding address. He had my number, but I doubted he'd use it unless he needed something. In that season of my life, Being needed without being valued was over. I drove to my new condo with the windows down, letting the breeze undo the heaviness that had clung to my chest for too many years. The sun felt different. Or maybe I was finally standing in it, not just surviving under it. The new place was smaller, but it was mine. Modern layout, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a balcony that caught the golden hour light like a painting. I unpacked slowly, not because I had to, but because for once I could. There was no one yelling from the hallway about lost socks. No one slamming the fridge because the groceries didn't magically refill themselves. No one using my Wi-Fi to mock me online. Just silence, sweet and earned. That first evening, I made a simple dinner. Roasted vegetables, rice, salmon, and plated it like I was my own guest of honor. I poured a glass of wine, toasted to the version of myself that survived being ridiculed by her own child, and promised her that she'd never be ignored again. 2 days later, he showed up at my office. He hadn't even messaged. He just walked into the reception area like it was still the old days. He was wearing the same graduation button-up, wrinkled now, like he hadn't changed or washed anything since I left. "Mom," he said, loud enough for a few coworkers to glance up from their desks. "We need to talk." I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me. "You can't just show up here," I said calmly. "Why not?" he snapped. "You're my mom." "That title doesn't give you access to everything," I replied. He scoffed. "You're really doing this? Over a joke?" "It wasn't a joke," I said. "It was a message, one I heard loud and clear." His face changed, anger melting into confusion. "So what? You're done with me?" "No," I said. "I'm done carrying you." He tried to argue, blame, plead, twisted into some form of betrayal, but I didn't flinch. I'd done my crying in silence. My boundaries were loud now. He stormed out eventually, and I walked back to my desk to find an email waiting. Promotion offer. Lead strategist, double the salary. It felt like the universe was clapping for me. That weekend, I bought myself a gift. A gold bracelet. Small, elegant, engraved with the words, "She didn't break, she built." And I wore it every day after. A reminder. A shield. A victory. The calls started a week later. Missed ones at first, then voicemails. "Mom, I just need to talk." "I didn't mean it like that." "You're really going to abandon your own son?" I didn't respond. Not because I didn't hear, but because I had heard him too many times before. And this time, I was listening to myself instead. At the office, I started mentoring 2 young women fresh out of college. Brilliant minds, kind hearts. One of them said, "I didn't know women like you existed in this field." I smiled and told her, "That's because women like me aren't usually allowed to take up space, but now I was taking it." Fully, unapologetically. At lunch, I sat in the break room scrolling past his name on my phone. 22 missed calls in 2 days. I muted the number, blocked it the next morning. I had spent years waiting for him to notice the weight I carried, and now he was watching it fall from my shoulders, stone by stone. As I rose, then came the text from my sister, short, cold. "He's saying you ruined his life." No greeting, no concern, just judgment wrapped in punctuation. I didn't reply, because she'd never asked what it was like to raise a boy alone after the man who helped make him vanished. She never saw the long nights, the fevers, the heartbreaks, the scraped knees and empty wallets. She never asked what it felt like to be laughed at on the one day meant to honor me. But now, she had opinions. Let all of them. The silence between me and my old life was finally filled with peace. That Sunday, I went to a bookstore and wandered for hours. I used to rush in and out, always in a hurry, always on a budget. This time, I left with 4 novels and a rare poetry collection I'd wanted for years. I didn't check the price. I checked my joy. That night, I sat on the balcony with the poetry book in one hand and tea in the other, moonlight spilling across the hardwood like a quiet blessing. For the first time in decades, my body didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like home. But healing has echoes. One day at work, we had an all-staff meeting. Big presentation. Important clients. I stepped into the conference room in a navy pantsuit. Hair pulled back, eyes steady. I didn't know he was there until I heard a gasp behind me. "That's your mom?" someone whispered. I turned around. My son was sitting at the far end of the room, not as a guest, as a junior intern for one of the vendors. Our eyes locked. He looked stunned, almost panicked. His boss leaned over and whispered, "You know her?" And before he could answer, the boss said, "She's a woman running this deal. You'd be smart to follow her lead." I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I turned back to the screen and started presenting. Voice clear, numbers sharp. The room listened. He listened. And for the first time, I knew he wasn't just seeing me as mom. He was seeing me as the woman I had become. The woman he once called stupid. The one the world now called leader. After that meeting, the energy shifted. He didn't approach me right away, just watched from across the office, like someone realizing too late that the museum painting they'd mocked was actually priceless. I overheard him one day in the hallway saying, "She's intense, but brilliant." The irony nearly made me laugh. The same boy who once rolled his eyes at my late-night typing now found himself trailing behind my strategies in client calls. But I didn't rub it in. I didn't need to. Because real power never begs to be seen, it simply arrives. The following week, his manager approached me. "He's bright," she said, "but undisciplined, entitled, doesn't take feedback well." I nodded. "Some lessons take time," I said. She smiled. "You're one of the sharpest we've worked with. Just thought you should know." I thanked her, then walked away before my heart could split in two again. I wish I could say that moment gave me satisfaction, that I felt avenged. But the truth is, grief hides in strange corners. I grieved the boy I raised. The boy who once fell asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. The boy who made Mother's Day cards out of construction paper and misspelled love as loof. That boy was gone. In his place was a man who had weaponized my sacrifices and spit them back at me as punchlines. And yet, somewhere beneath my pride, there was still a mother's ache. I didn't want him to suffer. I wanted him to evolve. One day after work, he waited for me in the lobby. "Mom," he said, voice low, "do you have 5 minutes?" I paused, looked him up and down. The pride was gone from his eyes, just hesitation, maybe regret. "Walk with me," I said. We stepped into the quiet of the city sidewalk, lights buzzing above us, taxis drifting past. "You were great in that meeting," he mumbled. "Thank you." "I didn't know you did all that stuff," he added. "You never asked," I said. We walked a few more blocks in silence. Then he stopped. I messed up. "Yes," I said, meeting his gaze. "You did." He nodded slowly. "I didn't mean it. The graduation thing." "You did," I corrected. "But you didn't understand the weight of it." He looked down. "I'm sorry." And this time, it didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded earned. "It's not about being sorry," I said. "It's about whether you're willing to learn." "From you?" he asked. "From anyone who's walked a harder road than you and still kept going," I said. He nodded again. "Okay." I didn't forgive him that night, but I didn't shut the door either. Healing doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's two people standing on a city block in silence, finally seeing each other. That night, I returned to my apartment and sat in the dark for a while, thinking, not crying, just breathing. Maybe redemption wasn't something you gave. Maybe it was something people earned in increments. In the work they do, the apologies they repeat, the mirrors they finally face. I didn't need to be his hero anymore. I just needed to be whole. Weeks passed. He didn't try to call again, and I didn't reach out either. But at work, something subtle changed. He started arriving early, taking notes, asking thoughtful questions. I watched from a distance, not as a mother, but as a woman who'd earned her seat at the table. There were moments, small ones, where I saw flickers of the boy I raised. When he complimented a coworker, when he stayed late to help a junior teammate debug an issue, when he stood back in a meeting and let someone else speak. Growth isn't loud. It's quiet, slow, and sometimes invisible, until one day you realize the ground beneath you has shifted. I had no idea what came next for him, whether he'd thrive or flounder. But I did know this. I had let go. Not out of anger, but because I finally understood that love without boundaries isn't love. It's submission. And I wasn't submitting anymore. That Saturday, I hosted a small dinner at my apartment. Just a few close friends. Women who had lifted me when I was too tired to stand, who reminded me that dignity doesn't require validation. We toasted to new seasons, to peace, to letting go of expectations handed to us by people who never truly saw us. Lisa, my oldest friend, raised her glass. To the woman who raised a son, built a career, and reclaimed her name. We clinked glasses. I smiled. The music played low, the candles flickered, and in that moment the world felt like it finally fit around me. Not too tight, not too loose, just right. Later that night I stood at the window overlooking the city, my reflection caught in the glass. A woman with silver at her temples, a softness in her eyes. Not from weakness, but from weathering the storm and refusing to bend. My phone buzzed. An email this time, from his boss. Just wanted to say thank you. Your son is turning things around. Must run in the family. I didn't respond. I just closed the laptop and let the quiet wrap around me like a shawl. This wasn't about pride anymore, or revenge. It was about arrival. The next morning, I went for a walk through the park. A little girl was riding a bike, her mother jogging alongside. The wind tugged at the child's scarf and the mother gently pulled it back into place. I smiled. That had once been me, running beside a boy who didn't know yet how to steer, trying to protect him from every fall, every scrape, every unkind word. But eventually, you have to let them ride alone. And if they fall, they fall. If they soar, they soar. Either way, you did your part. My part was done. Months passed, promotions came, new projects landed on my desk. My calendar filled up with travel, keynotes, interviews, things I once thought were reserved for other people, louder people, men in suits who never had to justify their presence. But I had arrived in my own way, and I never apologized for the route I took. One day, while preparing for a speaking engagement at a national tech summit, I glanced at the list of panelists. My name was there, top billing, and just beneath it, his. Same last name. Different story now. I smiled. Not because I wanted to outshine him, but because we had both made it here, just on different terms. I wondered if he would speak the truth this time, about who he was and who raised him. At the event we crossed paths, briefly, in the hallway near the dressing rooms. He paused. "Mom." "Hello," I said, nodding. He looked nervous. "You look like you belong here." I smiled faintly. "I do." There was a pause. Then he added, "Thanks for going first." That part hit me, not because it was flattery, but because for the first time he acknowledged the path I carved without stepping on it. "You're welcome," I said, then turned and walked to the stage. The lights were hot, the room full, but I wasn't nervous. I spoke about systems, innovation, resilience, about how silence can be a weapon or a sanctuary, depending on who holds it. And I ended with this. To every woman who's been called stupid, emotional, too much, too little, know this. You are not the label they gave you. You are the lesson they were too small to understand. The room stood, applauding. And somewhere in that crowd, I saw him, clapping, not for a mother, for a leader, for someone who had earned every word. That night, I didn't go home with a heavy heart. I went home with a quiet one, a content one, because closure isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's a soft click, a final word spoken at the exact right volume. He never called me stupid again, and I never needed him to. I had already proven myself to the only person whose opinion mattered, me. Weeks later, I received a card in the mail, no return address, just my name. Inside, a handwritten note. "You were never stupid." I was just too young to recognize brilliance when I saw it. I folded it slowly, placed it in a drawer not for safekeeping, but as a reminder that even the deepest wounds can turn into proof of survival. If you've ever been underestimated, misjudged, or mocked by the very people you once raised, know this. You are allowed to outgrow the versions of you they keep in their minds. You are allowed to thrive beyond their comfort zones. And you are allowed to be proud without apology. If this story felt like your story, leave a comment below. Tell me what you've walked through. Tell me how you rose anyway. Because this space, we built it together. For every comeback that didn't need permission, for every quiet strength finally given a mic.